Hi kids, it's Granny. It's time for Storytime Saturday. Things are starting to get a little bit tougher when it comes to telling these stories because, of course, as you get older, shit happens. Today's video is going to be just a little bit darker than my usual Storytime Saturdays. But, you know, life is what it is, and it was what it was, and I'm just going to tell you how it was. In 1977, I graduated from high school. By that point, my best friend Carol and I had kind of gone our separate ways. We still obviously went to the same school and everything, but I'd gotten really wild. I had just really gotten wild. I was doing any drug that I could get my hands on. I was smoking cigarettes, smoking pot. And Carol, being a good girl, just wasn't gonna be around that. So she started hanging out with a couple of other girls named Barbara and Erin, who also were just nice, well-behaved kids who didn't get into trouble. And I'm really glad that Carol made that decision to kind of find other friends besides me, because literally I was a bad influence. There were a lot of kids who were bad influences on me too. I'm not going to take all the blame, but in any case, Carol kind of had her own social life at that point, as did I. I hung out with Jeff constantly. I had a car. Well, I didn't own a car. My dad bought a metallic blue Pinto in 1976. Right after I got my driver's license, but it was his car. He wasn't like giving me a car. However, I wound up driving the car to school very frequently, and lunch hour was all about driving in the car. Usually smoking a bunch of pot and driving in the car. My friend Jeff and I figured out that if we went down a certain hill and hit about 40 miles an hour, that we could go over this little hump and all four wheels would come off the ground. And we did that like every lunch hour, over and over and over for many months. I'm really surprised I didn't totally kill that Pinto, because I jumped it. I jumped that Pinto. That was a great lunchtime activity. We were so lucky that we didn't get caught or hurt or wrecked the car, or gone out of control and plowed into somebody's at that yard. Point, 1977, my parents' drinking had gotten a little more intense. I think my getting wild had something to do with it. I tried to get them to stop at one point. In fact, my boyfriend at the time, Carl, was over at our house one night, and we were talking about, just between the two of us, we were talking about my parents drinking and how it was really kind of not okay. Meanwhile, we were doing all kinds of drugs, so I don't know who we thought we were to judge, but we decided my parents needed to stop drinking. We confronted them, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. I remember my mother screaming at me and saying, if we drink, it's your fault. You've put us through 1,000 hells. It was strange because I had gone in just a couple of short years from being their little doll, angel, beloved, welcome child to being someone that had put them through 1,000 hells. That was confusing to me and distressing. Although it didn't turn me around and make me want to be a good girl. So, I don't know. I tried doing LSD. A few times. I remember the first time I did it with a girlfriend in the park. And we actually went driving around in the Pinto. And I remember all the houses and their little yards looked so perfect and clean and awesome. And then the inside of the car kind of became a blue spaceship
and there were little blue bubbles. There's little blue bubbles all over in the Pinto. And I was driving people. I was driving on LSD.
Another time I did LSD and it wasn't quite such a happy experience. My boyfriend and I had planned to drop this acid and go to the Oakland Museum, which is a really cool museum. We'd been there lots of times before. So that was the plan for the day. So we dropped this green blotter acid and off we went to the museum. Well, for some reason that day I got on this God kick. And I remember saying to my boyfriend, I talk to God and he won't talk to me. I never hear his voice audibly. He's supposed to do anything. Why won't he talk to me? And so my boyfriend, he was actually an atheist. He just kind of blew me off, oh, you're tripping, don't worry about it. By the time we got to the museum, I was crying. And I started yelling at God, you've got to talk to me. Why won't you talk to me? Please just say something, talk to me. I started making such a scene that my boyfriend whisked me into the museum, got me in the elevator, and we went up to the roof of the museum where they had this roof garden and where I could just talk to God to my heart's content. And that's what I did. It took an hour or two for me to calm down and realize that that's not the way God talks to you necessarily. Yeah. My father's parents divorced when my father was quite young. Different story. His father had remarried, and his wife developed, his second wife, who I knew as my grandmother, developed what we think was probably a brain tumor, although I'm not sure if it was ever adequately diagnosed. But she just started losing her mind, and it was very rapid. It started with, asking the same questions over and over, kind of like someone with Alzheimer's. I remember that. I remember another visit where they came, and they had driven from Southern California up to visit us at our house. And when they arrived, my grandfather and my step-grandmother both were absolutely drenched in sweat. And my parents said, oh my gosh, why did you get so hot? And my grandfather said, well, Dewey kept saying she was cold. Dewey was his second wife. So I don't think she knew the difference between cold and hot. Literally, I think the woman was saying she was cold, but she was actually hot. And Grandpa kept turning up the heat, and by the time they got to our house, they were virtually on the brink of collapse. So we got them in the house, and, my mom is getting them some dry clothes to put on and, trying to get them something to drink and all that. And while our backs are turned, my step-grandmother, Dewey, went into my bedroom. Like I said, I was about 11 probably at this point. So I'm kind of backtracking in my timeline here, but this is part of the story about my grandpa, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you about this. This woman went into my bedroom. Now, this is probably let's see, how old was she? I've told you before, my parents were older parents. So my grandpa and grandma at that time were about 78, 79 years old. She goes in my bedroom and poops in my wastebasket. I'll let that sink in for a minute. She pooped in my wastebasket. It was a little wicker wastebasket. Didn't have a plastic bag in it. She had the runs really bad. It was pretty horrible. and my mom had to clean it up. And we knew at that point that Grandma was not capable of self-care. She got sent to a convalescent hospital, and Grandpa went on to live by himself in Southern California, San Diego, in fact. So, Grandpa's living in San Diego. I'm 17, in my senior year of high school, going wild. The phone rings one night, another one of these phone calls, right? I hate when the phone calls come in the middle of the night. It's always something bad. Grandpa was missing. Apparently, my aunt and uncle had taken a weekend trip, at least a weekend, it might have been longer, but they'd gone off to Palm Springs, left Grandpa alone at home, in their home, and he was no longer allowed to drive. I don't remember if it was his eyesight or forgetfulness, what it was, but he had lost his driver's license. But they still had his car in the garage. They still had his car keys hanging up somewhere. Anyway, apparently he had gotten a hold of the car keys. He had taken his car and left at some point. They'd come home from their trip from Palm Springs, and Grandpa's not there. They don't know how long he'd been gone. I remember in the phone conversation, they said something about, well, we didn't leave him with the ingredients to make his Manhattan. He liked his Manhattan every evening. That's a cocktail for those of you who don't drink. And so we think maybe he went to the store to get ingredients for his Manhattan, but, it's been a while. He's still not here, and we're calling the police. So they got the police out looking for Grandpa. Meanwhile, we're in Northern California. My dad is frantic. Imagine you're 79-year-old. No, excuse me. At that point, I think he was 83, 84. We wind up flying down there to try and assist with the search or whatever. The police are looking for his car, or any evidence of where he might have gone. And we're staying in a motel, and I had somehow brought some pot along. I made a pipe out of the empty toilet paper roll from the motel room and a piece of foil, and made a little pipe, and I remember sitting outside the motel room, like behind the hotel, where nobody would go, and smoking this little pipe. I guess I was stressed too. I'm sure my parents were drinking. It's like, in our family, the way you dealt with stuff was to put something in your body. A pill, alcohol, a drug. That was just kind of the going philosophy. Nobody spelled that out, but looking back on it, that's kind of what it was. So I'm out there smoking this pot. Here comes my dad around the corner all of a sudden, looking for me. I stuck the pipe under my leg or something really fast. And, he's like, what are you doing back here? What are you doing back here? And I'm like, I'm just hanging out. It's shady back here. I'm just hanging out. About that time, a phone call came to the motel room. The police had some news. There was a record of Grandpa's license plate going over the border into Tijuana. And that kind of made light bulbs go off, because Grandpa loved Tijuana. When he was a young man, Tijuana was like the place everybody went to party. If you were in the San Diego area, especially if you were in the service, that was just like party town. They also had a record of him some time later coming back through the border into the United States. And mind you, this is just a record of the license plate, because whether the border patrol stops you or not is up to them. Sometimes they wave people through. Or at least a lot of the times they did back then. But his license plate was recorded. They automatically take a picture of every license plate that goes through. So we knew that he had gone into Tijuana, and we knew that at least the car had come back through the other way. So my father decides to take me along with him, and we go out into the desert to look for my grandfather. I guess we were looking for a body. As I look back on it, it was an odd thing to take a 17-year-old along to do with you. But I think my dad felt like I was getting myself in trouble, and I don't know if he thought I was smoking pot or what he thought. He would have been right. And I will never forget looking in drainage tubes and in grasses and in orchards for my grandfather's body. We didn't find it, but the police did. I don't think it was more than a couple of days after that, the phone call came that his body had been recovered. It was severely decomposed, and it was found just over the border on the United States side. And there had been an arrest made in Mexico. Of course, during all this search, the Desperados and the United States police were kind of supposed to work together to solve this and seek justice. What the Mexican newspaper said and what the Federales told us is that they'd made an arrest. It was a couple of guys who had, I guess, befriended my grandfather once he got over the border and either tricked him or abducted him or killed him and transported him back across the line in his own car. And yeah, so my grandpa was murdered at the age of 82, 83. How many people get murdered after living a long life like that? You know, at that point you kind of have earned the right to die in your sleep. During some visit to my grandfather's house, I don't remember how old I was, maybe 12, 13. There was a conversation that I overheard where someone asked my father, "You're part Indian, aren't you?" All my life, people had asked me if my father was an Indian. I was never taught that he was, so generally I had said no. But I did notice that in this conversation, when someone asked my dad, "Well, you're part Indian, aren't you?" And my father didn't answer. My mother did. My mother, as quick as anybody has ever answered a question in this world, said, no, he's not. He just has ruddy skin. It's that ruddy skin of his. And I remember my dad chuckling. End of conversation. It wasn't until after my father's death that I found out that he was Native American. I had no idea. He was half Native American. His mother was French Indian. It was such a big deal, apparently. My mother was a Southern belle, and you know, in the 20s, you didn't bring home somebody of color. You just didn't do that. And her father, especially to her father, because her father was like KKK, literally. She remembers seeing him at a cross burning. So, you know, my dad, having mixed blood, was not going to fly, and it was their deep, dark secret that they took to their graves. And now I'm very proud of my heritage. I would have been proud of it then. I mean, awesome. I'm a freaking rainbow. I like that. I like being a rainbow. My father led a really tragic life. If I were to write a book about my father, it would just be like one sad chapter after another. And he was a cheerful man who took good care of his family. Yeah, he drank, but he was a functioning alcoholic. He played golf. He was an advertising executive. Went to Harvard Business School. My dad was an amazing human being, but he had a lot of hard knocks in life. And sometime I'll do a story time just on my dad and his growing up, because I'll tell you, it's really a heart-wrenching story. And once again, I've made 2 pages of notes, and I only got through 1 page because there was just so much to say about my grandpa. And that was the beginning of life getting real. And it got real fast. I love you guys. Thank you for listening to my long, drawn-out stories. And I don't know, I guess a few of you really enjoy them. I'm glad. I'm really glad. I'm just me, but at my age you do rack up a few stories. So I'll just keep them coming, and I hope you sit still for them. Anyway, peace out, you guys. See you later.